Okay, everybody, good morning. Good morning. It's time for Saturday Matters, so that you can get your beverages and snacks quietly and then take a seat. We're here to hear Gerry Garvy talk about Florence and saving a marriage, and we're all curious about it. We who've been here a while know that we can count on something pretty interesting, and this is sort of an unusual switch of direction for him. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Okey-doke. Let's see. Let me turn this thing on.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Just fine. Okay, great. So this talk this morning is extraordinarily self-indulgent on my part, but it's a story that I'd like to share with you. The business of saving a marriage is a bit over dramatic, but not really, because it's how the tale really started. I was in Germany on a several-month appointment at the Max Planck Institute for Nuclear Physics in Heidelberg, and Doris was remaining behind in the States. She had taken on an important job at Los Alamos and would visit occasionally. And sort of a long weekend in March, she had come over, and we went up to Cologne to spend time together. And it was a disaster. The weather was horrible, the hotel room uninhabitable, the food undigestible, just absolutely awful. So when I dispatched her back to the States and returned to Heidelberg, I came over to the American Express office in Heidelberg and said, "You have to save a marriage." And I said, "Find me the most romantic place you can in Europe, and I don't care what it costs, we'll just go ahead and do it." And as a result, the travel agency in Heidelberg set up this trip to Florence, which was just absolutely incredible for both Doris and I. And certainly, while I don't feel it necessarily saved the marriage, it certainly cemented it. Not being as good a traveler as Lowell, I had to go back to Florence probably 20 times to digest more or less what I'm going to show you again. Lowell seems to be able to breeze through a place and absorb it all quite immediately, but I'm not up to that. So, this view that you see vaguely here is the view of Florence that you get if you come in from the south side and you look across the Arno River. And here it is more directly. And what you see dominating the scene is the great cathedral of Florence. Over here is the tower of the National Sculpture Museum, the Bargello. This is the tower of the Badia, a very old church that Dante spent much of his time in. And this is the bell tower of the cathedral. And this other dominant structure over here is a thing that was called the Palazzo Vecchio, the old palace, and we'll come by that naming. And the Florence, the river, the Arno, is flowing by right here. Here's another view of the same thing in somewhat brighter light, but it's a view, I think, of any who's ever seen it, has it imprinted in their minds as being what Florence looks like. I know of nothing on the planet that looks anything quite like that. This is the view if you look down the Arno at that level. So we left Heidelberg, and it was about an 8-hour drive down to Florence. One of the nice things with that thing that I was having at the Max Planck Institute was we were given a BMW to use while we were there. So I drove down in that, and as is typical of most men, totally confident that I knew where the hell I was going. And I did fine. I certainly had no trouble finding Florence. But we got into Florence and was driving around, and I finally, after just going down all kinds of one-way streets the wrong way and things like that, I drove in actually and parked right here on the steps of this building and said, I give up. I just don't know where we're going. And Doris looked out the window and said, oh, there's the hotel. And that's how it began. It was sort of a really good start. Going inside, it was a beautiful and charming place. It was called the Hotel Bernini Palace.
Wow.
Looking out our window, we could see, here's the Tower of the Bargello, here's the Tower of the Badia, and here was the tower of the Florence Cathedral. And these were all accessible, just a little walk up that street. So here's a map to just get you acquainted with where we'll be. The star locates where the hotel was. I don't know how I managed to get lost in all these little narrow streets over here, but I did, and just fortunately ended up across the street. So here is the Palazzo Vecchio, the Duomo, the Badia, the Bargello. About a kilometer up the street here is a monastery that I'll show you one painting from. And here is the Uffizi, the art gallery. You see these things are all quite nearby. Here's the Ponte Vecchio across the river, and over here is the Pitti Palace, the final residence of the Medicis. So you can see we were just beautifully located in the center of town to go and explore. So the first evening, so it was about an 8-hour drive down, so we were rather tired. But in the evening, we went out and came around this corner. Here's the Palazzo Vecchio. The hotel is tucked around back there. And came into the Piazza della Signorini, it's called. This was the old office building called, at one time, the Palazzo Signorini, where when Florence functioned as a republic, the members of the council would be sequestered so that they would not be subject to outside influences. But it got its name, Palazzo Vecchio, when the last Medici left it and went across the river to inhabit the Pitti Palace, and simply referred to the place left behind as Palazzo Vecchio, the old place. And so The first thing you notice when you walk into it, which is quite different from scenes in our streets, is a whole bunch of statues scattered around, and these statues are indeed sculptures and bronze castings of quite high merit. This building here is the loggia of the Uffizi, and the Uffizi runs down this way towards the river, the Arno. So we came in and started walking around, and the first thing we started seeing was all this statuary, quite remarkable and just different from anything we ever had encountered before. So 3 of the pieces that I show you here are Perseus with the head of Medusa. That was done by Bellini. This is Hercules and Castus. That's Bandolino is a sculptor absolutely unknown to me, and remains unknown to me. I don't know of what else he did. And this is the rape of a rather famous statue, The Rape of the Sabine Women by Giambologna. So the first thing you notice is, good God, there's a whole bunch of people without their clothes on. And it's pretty violent stuff. I think that was kind of the first thing that hit us about that sculpture. Here is the sculpture on the fountain that was present in the thing, and this is Neptune and attendant figures, and this figure you see on horse there is a Cosimo I, Duke of Tuscany. He was probably the last impressive member of the Medici family, but he led them across the river to inhabit the Pitti Palace. He was the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. So we spent the evening in this wonderful piazza, drinking and just marveling at what we had seen. The next day, we walked up the street and walked into the Bargello. That's the museum, National Museum of Sculpture in Italy. And just as you go in the door, you're greeted with these 3 magnificent pieces here, 2 of them by Giambologna. This one of Oceana. This is a bronze Mercury that he did, and this is a Michelangelo sculpting of Bacchus with a vessel of wine and a young man in attendance. When you walk out of the first floor, you walk into this courtyard, which is just, to me, staggering in how beautiful and how gracious the dimensions of it are. And if you ascend up the stairs and turn to the right, you go into a room that is known as Donatello's room. Donatello is probably the greatest sculptor of that period, and this room is just extraordinarily impressive. First of all, you notice that the statuary is given lots of space so that there's a lot of room between it. The ceilings are extremely high. The light is, as far as I could tell, absolutely natural. And we were there in the morning. I don't know quite when this picture was taken. None of the pictures that I'm using I took myself. If you want to get really fine photographs. You really need professionals who take them in high resolution with more bits on their cameras than I could probably carry around. So here are some of the statues of Donatello. This is the symbol of Florence. It's called Marzocco. It's a lion, and originally in the when it was out in the Piazza della Signorini, it was sort of standing on a wolf, and it is said to have depicted the triumph of Florence over Pisa. But at any rate, it's a magnificently sculptured thing, and somehow you look at the face of that lion. We won't have that opportunity, but you see wisdom and strength in it. In that room, there's a statue over here of David in marble, done by Donatello. This is a John the Baptist. Back here is a putti, a little angel that he did. This is St. George. Won't say much about it. But there are two bronzes in the back that are absolutely startling. Hard to believe. They were, for me, sort of shattering when I saw them. And so the first one is a statue. All three of these will be David's. This is David. Oh my goodness. What is that? Well, anyway, this is Verrocchio, a statue of...
1474, it says.
Oh, you bet. 1474. I guess what I was trying to do was get rid of that. There we are. Verrocchio, 1474. So it's actually the oldest of the three statues that I'll show you. Here's David as a young man, the head of Holofernes at his feet and a sword in his hand. The next is a thing that Donatello had done in marble in 1408, again of David, apparently no sword in the hand, but here is the head of Holofernes, and I think this must be the end of the sling that was used to hurl the stone that was there. But absolutely shocking to me was this statue in bronze done by Donatello in 1437. It was the first full nude statue done since classical times. And when you see it first, you are just struck by the incredible beauty of this creature. Whatever it is, he's standing on the head of again of Goliath, and there's a certain eroticism about the statue that I won't go into, but leads you to believe that Donatello, who himself was homosexual, believed that David may have overtaken Goliath by other means. And when I say that thing is beautiful, look at it. This is the head of that statue. And it's done in 1434. Just shockingly, it just takes your breath away. It's just absolutely perfect, and you just wonder, why can't we do anything like that today? For me, was a breathtaking experience, and I'll just go back over it again. So there is the full statue. When I saw it first, I thought, oh, this must be some French girl in the 19th century with a lovely sunbonnet on. And then you find, no, this is a thing done in 1437 as a statue of David. Is the head. Just absolutely beautiful. In the Bargello, there's also some absolutely marvelous ceramic work. This thing is at its base is about 10 feet across. And this is work in terracotta and with a sort of porcelain-like covering. And this is work of Luca della Robbia, who taught his whole family how to do that. So there are many della Robbia things. Again, it is just magnificent how simple and beautifully those faces are rendered. Now, next, off to the museum. So there are the Uffizi has just an incredible collection of painting, which I won't go into. What I'll try to do is stick with a rather simple theme. One of the themes that Florence painters seemed to be much addicted to was the Annunciation. If you recall, that's when the archangel comes down and tells Mary that she is to become the Son of God. The Mother of God, giving birth to the Son of God. And this is the earliest painting in the Uffizi of that. It's done not by a Florentine. Martini actually came from Siena, which is about 30 miles down south from Florence. Here is the angel speaking to Mary, and she's somewhat reluctant about taking on this task. It is both an early and a magnificent thing. This thing is an altarpiece, so it is about 10 feet across. And this embellishment of gold in the scenery is a thing that Sienese painters seem to be very fond of, and it just persisted through all Sienese paintings as far as I could see. The next picture of the Annunciation was due to a cleric, Fra Angelico, who painted many things, and this is not in the Uffizi. This is in a monastery about a kilometer away from the Duomo. And as you ascend the stairs up to the monk's cell in the monastery, at the head of the stairs is this painting of the Annunciation again. And you can see that at this time the artists are just starting to learn perspective. And he's got a really fine sense of the three-dimensionality of the volume, and again, a very beautiful angel and lovely young woman as Mary. The next one is a far more sophisticated painting. This one is done by Botticelli, probably around 1480. And again, there is the angel in a very posture of trying to induce Mary to take on this task, and Mary not at all certain of the role. And finally, this is oh my gosh, why do I keep forgetting his name?
Da Vinci.
Huh?
Da Vinci.
Yes, Leonardo da Vinci. Thank you. This is Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the same thing. Again, a very elaborate and beautiful angel It's just an incredible painting, and Mary, quite a lovely young woman. Not clearly so reluctant, apparently. And while you're there in the Uffizi, you have the opportunity to see these other wonderful paintings. This is The Birth of Venus by Botticelli, quite a famous and beautiful thing. Again, quite a large painting. And in the same room, Botticelli's Primavera, the sort of rite of spring. And here is this dark creature. Here is the wind that is pursuing this young woman, and apparently it had been doing it for a very long time. So this was done in 1480. And you can see there is a certain, what should I say, humanity and joyfulness and maybe even eroticism of what was going on at the time. But I found it to me to be really quite a eye-opening thing, and made me feel far more intensely human than I had felt before. And this bond with people who had lived 6 centuries before seemed closer and nearer. This is the front view of the Florence Cathedral. In a sense, it's kind of shocking. Somebody talked about it really looks like a painted old whore, but it's just amazing how intricate and colorful this is. And all those colors are achieved with selecting natural stone that have the colors that you're looking for. So this is the front end of the cathedral. This is the back end here, and this is Botticelli's dome. Brunelli's dome. No, not Botticelli. Brunelleschi. Oh my gosh. So Brunelleschi's dome, and it's an incredible job that Brunelleschi had. This span that was open was 150 feet wide and 180 feet above ground. And Brunelleschi had to figure out how to build a dome over that, and figured out he did. I'll say a few words about it. There actually was kind of a contest. I think it was in 1414. They wanted to get a dome over that opening. It was a real problem. It precluded using much of the church. So they held a contest to figure out how to go ahead with the dome, and people came forward with plans as to how to do it. Brunelleschi refused, in a sense, to show his plans, and the tale, and the reason he did was he said, if I show you the plans, anybody would be able to do it. Well, anyway, there was, what he said is, I will give you another competition to decide who has got the intellectual power to figure out how to do this. He said, we will have a slab of smooth marble, and one must be able to stand an egg upright on that. And apparently it's decided to go along with that. And obviously everyone who tried failed, till Brunelleschi said, well, finally I will show you how to do it. Took it and cracked the egg so that it stood there. So he was, in a sense, right if he showed you how to do it, Anybody could do it, but the feat of how he actually managed to construct this dome is to my mind still ongoing. I know technically now how the job was done, but what I cannot figure out, and I can't find anyone who can give me the information on what is the sequence that you go ahead and do the construction with. Because very often you make an elaborate plan and you find, uh-oh, it's beautiful, and I see the final thing, but there's no way you can get there. It's like, you end up painting yourself into a corner that you can't get out of. And that Brunelleschi, that's to me what was so staggering, is that he could see that the way he wanted to construct this dome would actually work from beginning to end. And that's an incredible undertaking. Well, across from this cathedral is the baptistry. And I'm going to turn our attention to the baptistry right now, because on the baptistry there is a set of doors, the east doors, that are really quite famous, and these doors were made by Gilberti, and many people think that they in some sense represent the real beginning of the Renaissance art. So here are the doors. There are 10 panels on it, and I'll show you a few of those panels. This is the first panel on the door, the creation of Adam and Eve. Here is God rising Adam from the earth. Here is God creating Eve out of Adam's rib. And up here you can see them being led astray and eating the apple from the tree of knowledge. And finally over here on this side being driven out of paradise. Now they are clothed or covered, and here is the angel driving them out. Next door, or one of the other doors, is the story of Abraham. Here is Abraham being getting his instructions from 3 angels, and here willing to sacrifice his son till it is interrupted by an angel. This is the story of Noah. Noah in his drunkenness with his 3 sons. This is the family of Noah, his sons and himself coming out of the ark, and the animals leaving with him. Notice here that the lions are now looking over here at the cow or the buffalo or whatever that is. No longer is it the happy world of paradise where everybody dwells in peace, but the real world of toil, sorrow, and so forth. And here is one of the doors of one of the panels that has Moses on it, receiving the 10 Commandments, and down below people in a more or less chaotic state looking for things. But this is just amazing to think that these things were all being done in the early 1400s. For the first time, there was sort of a breaking away from an overly religious emphasis on what mattered, and a return, in some sense, to the importance of people, humans. This is now a work by Luca della Robbia, who before you saw worked in ceramic. This is a thing he did in stone, which is a choir loft to have been used in the cathedral, and it was for the children's choir. There was a competition to make this choir loft, and Luca della Robbia, who I had never thought of as a sculptor, actually sculpted this absolutely wonderful, beautiful, and whimsical thing. I'll show you some of the panels, and beat Donatello, who did a beautiful job of his sculpture, but it was nowhere near as joyous as these various panels were of these mischievous youngsters. I just love this little girl over here, or I guess I can't tell what it is. Might be a boy. But at any rate, that joyous smirk on his face is just wonderful. And here's another one that somehow it just captures the spirit of a child so absolutely wonderfully that you're quite taken away by again. And again, you just wonder, why do so many people have their clothes off? I'm not sure I can figure that out. I think it was maybe just, the fact that for hundreds of years they had been covered up for so long that when the explosion came, off came the clothes. Also in the works of the Duomo is a sculpture by Michelangelo, and this is actually himself, a sculpting of himself that he included in the Pieta scene of Christ being laid in his tomb. This is a beautiful thing that Brunelleschi had done as an architect. He actually never, as far as I could see, formally studied architecture or anything like that. But this was an orphanage for the young people in Florence whose parents had been killed, and it's just to my mind, so beautiful in the symmetry of it. So here's a list of Florentine Renaissance artists. Now, I cheated a bit by including people who were Florentine, but were certainly pre-Renaissance in Cimabue and Giotto. But this list of people that you see that are all in the 1400s, with some weak extension, as it were, into the 16th century. Ending probably, it would be legitimate to end it with Vasari, who was nowhere near an artist at the talent level of his predecessors. But he is an art critic, and we owe a great deal to him because he ended up telling us all about the artists who had lived in Florence and what they had achieved. But that is a pretty remarkable list of artists. And what they did, what happened is they would go and work for one another, and it was a total sort of apprenticeship with people being sponsored by various wealthy merchants in Florence at the time. So here's just some interesting dates to put together. So Giovanni Medici moves to Florence. He's a pretty sharp guy. He dealt in wool and got the banking business going. That was to become the foundation of the wealth of the Medicis. Gilberti won a contest to sculpt the northern doors of the baptistry, so that when it became time to figure out who was going to do the east doors, there no longer was any contest. Gilberti just went ahead and did it. The papacy comes back to Rome from Avignon, and then really the shrewdest of the family, Cosimo, takes over from Giovanni and gets the Medici fortune really underway. So other things going on, the death of Joan of Arc, Constantinople falls, the Gutenberg Bible is printed. Lorenzo Medici come to be known, as many of you know, as Lorenzo the Magnificent, ascends to power in Florence. Meanwhile, in Rome, things aren't going quite so well. Borgia becomes a pope. Columbus reaches America. Lorenzo ends up dying at the end. And as you could see, Florence was becoming exuberant and maybe far too wealthy and earthbound, and a preacher by the name of Girolamo Savonarola comes to become the head of the Republic. He's a preacher who is associated with the name the Bonfire of the Vanities, where people took their wealth and their art and threw it on the fire. Botticelli is rumored to have thrown some of his paintings in. But at any rate, Savonarola certainly sees the Medicis as the cause of much of the problem, and due to his influence there, exile from Florence, and he becomes basically de facto head of the Florentine Republic. He then, in a way, overstepped his bounds. The Pope declared him a heretic, and he ends up being executed, publicly hung and burned as a heretic. The Republic, then the Medicis return, and they end up dissolving the Republic of Florence, and Alessandro de' Medici becomes the first Duke of Florence. And then there ends up being 4 Medici popes. One of the first being Pope Leo in 1513. Machiavelli, who worked for the Medicis, publishes The Prince. The Reformation is now beginning throughout Europe. Leonardo da Vinci dies, and Cosimo, that guy I showed you on horseback in the beginning, becomes the second Duke of Florence, and later the first Duke of Tuscany, and the Medicis move across the river to the Pitti Palace. And the last, in 1737, the last Medici male dies without a male heir. And his sister left everything to the state of Tuscany with the simple stipulation that it could never be moved away from Tuscany. But at any rate, the Uffizi and all the properties of the Medici family were turned over to the state. Here are some of the artists that the Medici supported. Giovanni early on supported Masaccio and Brunelleschi. Cosimo, Donatello and Fra Angelica. Lorenzo the Magnificent, Botticelli, Girolamo, Leonardo and Michelangelo. And Cosimo then moves across to the Pitti Palace. And from then, the family seems to sort of have run downhill. And the great art of Florence is over and done with. working for, however, for him was Vasari. And Vasari undertook this thing called Vasari's Corridor. It allowed the family, which initially was residing in the Palazzo Vecchio, which was called Palazzo Signorini at the time, except now it was being occupied by the Duke of Florence, so the Republic's days were over. And he built this corridor that allowed you to move around so that you weren't exposed to the public. You came down over the Uffizi, came across down here, across the river, across the Ponte Vecchio, and over here to the PD Palace, just an enormous and, to my mind, incredibly ugly building. But nevertheless, this corridor is about 1 kilometer long, and it's totally lined with paintings. None of them very good. Now, to turn to just a somewhat sadder note, this is the flood that hit Florence in 1966. So this is the Palazzo di Signorini where we initially went, and here it is, full of water. You can see how deep it is, maybe 3 feet or so on these cars. The water is flooded in. Here it is in front of the baptistry. The water streaming down the street, filled up again, maybe to a depth of what might be as much as 6 feet there. One of the hardest hit places was both the Piazza Santa Croce and the church inside. This is the interior of this magnificent church, with the order of maybe a foot or so of mud and water and mess in the middle of it. It was truly a tragedy. Millions of people, not millions, hundreds of thousands of people came to help clean up, and they were known as the Mud Angels. This is a picture, the final picture that I'll show you. The flood of how the Arno overflowed. The Ponte Vecchio is down here. The river has flown over its banks and into the city and through it and out the other side. It was remarkable that they were saved so much from it. I think the only thing that was really lost was a painting, a crucifix painting by Cimabue that was totally ruined and beyond restoration. So that's all I've got to say. Be happy to take any questions. Yes?
There's Lowell back there. Right?
Question.
Lowell and Henry.
I'll wait for a microphone.
Well, okay. Henry's closer.
I was just wondering what caused the flood in '66, and have they done something to prevent it from recurring?
Not as much as you would have hoped for. It was really just a single day's, the previous day, something like 8 inches of rain had fallen, most of it upstream from Florence, and for some reason that flooding, and it subsided within a day. So it was rather different from the kind of floods that we're used to. It's in some way almost something more akin to a flash flood than something with a lot of long-standing water waiting for a great river to reside. The Arno is not that big.
Gerry, are your slides gone forever?
No, I can bring them back.
There's one, the orphanage I think if I remember correctly, if you look at the orphanage, there's a series of white on blue medallions around the edge of
Yes, there are.
Yeah. In fact, if I remember correctly, that was a symbol for Children's Orthopedic Hospital many years ago. I think there's a replica of that, or there used to be at least, if my memory serves me right, in the entrance of Children's. So there's an interesting tie between that piece of work and Seattle.
Well, like I said, Lowell's a much better traveler than I am. Hi.
Speaking of that, the orphanage.
Yes.
If you look at your slide and there's a loggia that goes along.
Let me get it back.
Yeah, with the medallions at the Delarobium medallions at the top. If you walked into that loggia and go to the far left end, there's it's like a revolving shelf, and mothers that were possibly not married and in trouble and for whatever reason would put their babies on this shelf, ring a bell. Yeah, it's over on the left. And they put their babies on the shelf and then spin it around. The nuns would come and take them, and totally anonymous way to not, to have the baby be taken care of.
Thank you.
Just for the chronology, were you there before and after the flood?
No, we were there in 1991, so the flood was well over. All that were left were, especially in the piazzas of San Marco, the stains of the water were still visible on the buildings, and you could see where the water level had been.
Joe, did you want to say something? Okay. Thank you so much.